The gunshot that killed Olivia Carson's husband echoed through the saloon at 12:30, and by the time the sun set over Jackson, Wyoming that September evening in 1878, she found herself a widow with a 4-year-old son and nothing but debts to her name. She stood in the cramped room above the general store where they had been living, holding little Thomas against her hip while he whimpered into her shoulder, his small fingers clutching the fabric of her worn calico dress. The boy did not understand why his father had not come home, why men kept knocking on their door demanding money, why his mother's face had gone pale as fresh milk. Olivia was 23 years old and had believed in love once, back when Richard Carson had courted her with promises of a good life in the Wyoming Territory. He had been handsome and charming, quick with a smile and quicker with a card deck, and she had been too young and too foolish to see the darkness that followed gambling men like shadows at noon. Now Richard lay in a pine box at the undertaker's, shot through the heart by a man he owed $300, and that same man was demanding she pay the debt or lose everything they owned. She had exactly $12 to her name and a child who needed feeding. The knock on the door came just as Thomas finally fell asleep in the narrow bed they shared. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it, expecting another creditor, another threat. Instead, she found herself looking up at a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He held his hat in his hands, his dark hair falling across his forehead, and something in his expression was gentle despite the hard lines of his jaw. "Mrs. Carson," he said, his voice low and rough like wind through prairie grass. "My name is Benjamin Porter. I was there today when your husband was shot." Olivia's throat tightened. "Did you know him?" "No, madam. I just arrived in Jackson this morning looking for work." He shifted his weight, his boots scuffing against the wooden landing. "I saw what happened. Your husband was unarmed when Jack Brennan shot him. It was murder, plain and simple, but Brennan's got the sheriff in his pocket. Why are you telling me this?" Olivia asked, exhaustion making her voice sharper than she intended. Benjamin looked past her into the small room, his gaze settling on the sleeping child. "Because I heard Brennan's men talking at the saloon. They are coming tomorrow to take whatever you have. I thought you should know. I have nothing worth taking except my son, and they will have to kill me before they touch him." Something flickered in Benjamin's eyes, something that might have been respect or admiration. "How much does your husband owe?" $300. "I might as well owe $3,000 for all the chance I have of paying it." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Olivia felt suddenly conscious of how she must look, her blonde hair coming loose from its pins, her eyes red from crying, her dress stained with flour from the general store where she had been working that morning before the world fell apart. "I have a proposition," Benjamin said finally. "I am a ranch hand by trade. Good with horses, better with cattle. I can find work, but I need a place to stay while I get established. You need money and protection. I could stay here, help with the boy, contribute to the household. Nothing improper," he added quickly, seeing the alarm in her face. "I will sleep in the stable below, but if people think you have a man around, they might think twice about causing trouble." Olivia stared at him. "You are a stranger. Why would you help me?" "Because I watched a man get shot in cold blood today, and nobody did a damned thing about it." "Because you have a little boy who just lost his father. Because it is the right thing to do." He met her eyes steadily. "I am not asking for anything except a roof over my head and maybe a meal now and then. The rest I will earn honest." She should have said no. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was madness, inviting a strange man into her life when everything was already chaos. But something in Benjamin Porter's face made her believe him, some quality of straightforward honesty that Richard had never possessed. "1 week," she said. "You can stay 1 week, and we will see how it goes." Benjamin nodded, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "That is all I ask, madam." He settled into the stable that night with nothing but a bedroll and saddlebags, and in the morning, Olivia woke to find him already gone. Panic seized her briefly until she looked out the window and saw him in the yard below, chopping firewood with steady, rhythmic strokes. Thomas pressed his face against the glass beside her, watching with wide brown eyes. "Who is that man, Mama?" he asked. "His name is Mr. Porter. He is going to be staying here for a little while to help us." "Is he going to be my new papa?" The question hit Olivia like a fist to the stomach. "No, sweetheart, he is just a friend who is going to help us for a bit." But Thomas was already pulling on his clothes, eager to go downstairs and meet the stranger who swung an axe like it weighed nothing at all. Benjamin looked up when they emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Morning, Mrs. Carson, and you must be Thomas." The boy hid behind Olivia's skirts, suddenly shy. Benjamin crouched down to his level, his expression open and friendly. "You know, Thomas, I could use some help stacking this wood. Think you are strong enough to carry a few pieces?" Thomas peeked out, clearly torn between caution and the desire to prove himself. Finally, he nodded and stepped forward, his small hands reaching for a piece of kindling. Benjamin handed it to him with the same seriousness he might show a fellow ranch hand, and something in Olivia's chest loosened just a fraction. The week passed in a blur of strange new routines. Benjamin found work at the Roberts Ranch 5 miles outside town, rising before dawn to ride out and returning at dusk with his wages. He gave Olivia 3/4 of everything he earned, keeping only enough for tobacco and the occasional drink. She protested at first, but he was adamant. "We had an agreement," he said simply. "I pay my way." With the extra money, Olivia was able to buy better food for Thomas and start setting aside small amounts toward Richard's debt. It was nowhere near enough, but it was something. More than that, Benjamin's presence seemed to create a buffer between her and the world. Men who had leered at her in the street now tipped their hats and moved on. The landlord stopped making threats about eviction. Even Jack Brennan's men kept their distance, though she sometimes caught them watching from across the street with narrowed eyes. Benjamin was good with Thomas in a way that surprised her. He taught the boy to whittle, sitting together in the evening with pieces of scrap wood and a sharp knife, showing him how to shape the grain into rough figures of horses and cattle. He answered Thomas's endless questions with patience, explaining how to read the weather in the clouds, how to tell a good horse from a bad one, why the mountains turned purple at sunset. "My papa never had time to teach me things," Thomas said one evening, his voice matter of fact in the way of children who accept the world as it is. Benjamin's hand stilled on the piece of wood he was carving. "Well, your papa probably had a lot on his mind. He was always at the saloon. Mama used to cry when he did not come home." Olivia, who had been washing dishes in the corner, felt her face burn with shame. But when she glanced at Benjamin, there was no judgment in his expression, only a quiet sadness. "Sometimes grown people make mistakes," he said to Thomas. "That does not mean they do not love their children." It was a kinder interpretation than Richard deserved, but Olivia was grateful for it. She did not want Thomas to grow up hating his father, even if that father had left them nothing but trouble. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. Autumn settled over Jackson with golden aspens and crisp mornings that smelled of wood smoke. Benjamin continued to insist he was just staying until he saved enough to move on, but somehow he never quite had enough, and Olivia never quite asked him to leave. They fell into an easy domesticity that felt both natural and strange, like wearing someone else's well-broken-in boots. She found herself noticing small things about him. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck when it got too long. The scar on his left hand that he said came from a broken stirrup when he was 16. How he always checked the locks on the doors before going down to the stable each night, making sure they were safe. The careful distance he maintained, never touching her even accidentally, always respectful to the point of formality. It made her ache in ways she had not expected. Richard had been passionate in the early days, all heat and hunger, but there had been no tenderness in it, no real care for her comfort or happiness. Benjamin's quiet consideration felt like a language she was only beginning to understand. One afternoon in late October, Olivia was hanging laundry in the yard when Jack Brennan himself appeared, flanked by two of his men. She froze, her hands full of wet linens, her heart suddenly racing. Brennan was a thick-bodied man in his 40s with a face like weathered leather and eyes that showed no light. He had made his money in the mining camps to the north, then moved to Jackson and bought up half the town through loans and intimidation. Richard had owed him money for nearly a year, always promising to pay after the next game, the next sure thing. "Mrs. Carson," Brennan said, his voice deceptively pleasant, "I have been very patient about your late husband's debt." "I am paying what I can," Olivia said, forcing herself to stand straight and meet his eyes. $10 a week. At that rate, you will be paying me for the next 6 months. I am a businessman, not a charity. I want the full amount by the end of the month, or I will be forced to take collateral." "I have nothing you could possibly want." Brennan's gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I can think of a few ways you could work off the debt. A woman alone needs protection in this town. I could provide that." The implication was clear and vile. Olivia felt bile rise in her throat, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the air like a whip crack. "The lady has protection already." Benjamin stood at the corner of the building, still in his work clothes, dust on his boots and his hat pushed back on his head. There was nothing overtly threatening in his posture, but something in the way he held himself made Brennan's men shift uneasily. "And who might you be?" Brennan asked, his false pleasantness evaporating. "Benjamin Porter, I live here." "Is that so? Funny, I heard Mrs. Carson was a widow." "She is. I am a boarder and a friend. And I am telling you that she is paying the debt in good faith. You will get your money, but you will get it on her terms, not yours." Brennan's face darkened. "You have a lot of nerve, Cowboy. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are. You are a man who shot an unarmed man over a card debt, and you are trying to intimidate his widow into your bed. Where I come from, we have a name for men like that, and it is not one I will say in front of a lady." The air seemed to crystallize, every second stretching taut. One of Brennan's men reached for his gun, but Brennan raised a hand, stopping him. "You are new to Jackson, Porter, so maybe you do not understand how things work here. People who cross me tend to have accidents, fall off horses, get trampled by cattle. You understand what I am saying?" "I understand you perfectly," Benjamin said, his voice calm as still water. "And I am telling you that if anything happens to Mrs. Carson or her boy, or to me for that matter, I have left a letter with the marshal in Cheyenne detailing exactly what I witnessed the day Richard Carson was murdered. Now, the sheriff here might be in your pocket, but the territorial marshal is not. You might want to think about that before you make any more threats." It was a bluff. Olivia knew it was a bluff because Benjamin had never left Jackson since arriving. But Brennan did not know that, and uncertainty flickered across his face. "You are playing a dangerous game," Brennan said finally. "No game, just doing what is right." Brennan stared at him for a long moment, then turned his cold eyes back to Olivia. End of November. $300, or the deal is off and I will take payment however I see fit. He left with his men trailing behind him, and Olivia's knees nearly buckled with relief. Benjamin was at her side in an instant, his hand on her elbow steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face close to hers, his eyes searching. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand was warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve, the first real touch they had shared, and she found herself not wanting him to let go. "That was foolish," she managed finally. "You just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in Jackson." "He was already your enemy. At least now he knows you are not alone. But the letter to the marshal, that was a lie, yes, but a useful one. I will ride to Cheyenne tomorrow and actually write the letter, make it true. It will give us some insurance." "Us," Olivia repeated softly. "When did this become us?" Benjamin's hand dropped from her arm and he stepped back, sudden awkwardness in his expression. "I apologize, madam. I did not mean to presume." "No," she interrupted. "I am glad. She struggled to find the words. "You did not have to stay. You do not owe me anything, but you keep helping anyway, and I do not understand why." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My father left when I was 5 years old, just rode out one day and never came back. My mother worked herself to death trying to keep us fed and clothed. I watched her struggle, watched people who could have helped turn their backs because it was not their problem. I swore when I grew up, I would never be that person. I would never see someone in trouble and just walk away." His eyes came back to hers, intense and sincere. "Maybe I cannot fix everything that is broken in this world, but I can do this. I can help you and Thomas, and that matters." Something cracked open in Olivia's chest, some wall she had built around herself after too many disappointments. She reached out and touched his hand, just briefly, her fingers brushing his calloused palm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." His fingers curled around hers for just a moment, warm and solid, and then he released her and stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get cleaned up for supper. Thomas will be wondering where I am." He left her standing in the yard with her heart beating too fast and the lingering warmth of his touch still on her skin. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Olivia sat at the small table and counted her money by candlelight. Even with Benjamin's contributions, she had only managed to save $80. At this rate, she would never have $300 by the end of November, which was only 4 weeks away. She heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to find Benjamin in the doorway, his hair damp from washing, his shirt clean but worn thin at the elbows. "Could not sleep," he said. "Saw your light was still on. I am doing figures. It does not look good." He pulled out the other chair and sat across from her, studying the neat columns of numbers she had written. "How much are you short?" $220. It might as well be 2,000. Benjamin drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. "The Roberts Ranch is taking on extra hands for the winter cattle drive next week. Pays triple wages because it is hard, dangerous work. If I sign on, I could make maybe $50. "Absolutely not," Olivia said sharply. "Those winter drives are deadly. Men freeze to death, get lost in storms, fall from horses, and break their necks. It is good money. It is not worth your life." He looked at her with something warm in his expression. "Worried about me, Mrs. Carson?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course I am worried. Thomas has become very attached to you. If something happened, Thomas," he repeated, and there was a note in his voice that made her look up. His eyes held hers across the table, the candlelight casting shadows across his face. "Is it just Thomas who would miss me?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken things. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should deflect, make some light comment, maintain the careful distance they had preserved. but she was so tired of pretending, so tired of being alone. "No," she said quietly. "It is not just Thomas." Benjamin's breath caught, audible in the quiet room. Olivia, the sound of her Christian name on his lips sent a shiver through her. He had never used it before, always keeping to proper formality. "I know this is not the time," he continued, his voice rough. "You are still in mourning, and I am just a ranch hand with nothing to offer. But I need you to know that staying here, helping you and Thomas, it is not charity. It is not obligation. I stay because—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I stay because every morning I wake up, and my first thought is hoping I will see you smile that day. I stay because Thomas looks at me like I hung the moon, and it makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves that. I stay because you are the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and being near you feels like coming home to a place I have been searching for my whole life." Olivia could not breathe. Tears pricked at her eyes, but they were not sad tears. "I know I have no right," Benjamin said, starting to rise. "I should not have said—" She reached across the table and caught his hand, holding tight. "Do not apologize. Please do not apologize for being the only good thing in my life right now." He stared at their joined hands, then slowly, carefully, brought her fingers to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. It was chaste, respectful, but it sent heat flooding through her entire body. "I will find a way to get the money," he said. "I promise you Brennan will not touch you or Thomas, whatever it takes. We will find a way together," Olivia corrected. "You are not alone in this anymore either." His smile was like sunrise, slow and warming everything it touched. The next morning, Benjamin rode to Cheyenne as promised, making the long journey to file his letter with the territorial marshal's office. He returned 3 days later, exhausted but satisfied, and confirmed that there was now an official document detailing what he had witnessed the day of Richard's murder. It was not much protection, but it was something. Meanwhile, Olivia had been thinking. She was a good seamstress, had always made her own clothes and Thomas's. The town had no proper dressmaker, just a tailor who did men's suits. If she could take in sewing, alterations, maybe even make dresses for the wealthier women in Jackson, she could earn extra money. She mentioned the idea to Benjamin over supper, and his face lit up. "That is brilliant. Mrs. Roberts at the ranch was just complaining that she had to send all the way to Denver for a decent dress. You think she would be interested?" "I think half the women in this county would be interested. You just need to get the word out." Within a week, Olivia had her first 3 commissions. The work was painstaking, requiring her to sew late into the night by lamplight, but she did not mind. Each stitch was a step closer to freedom from Brennan's debt. Benjamin helped by entertaining Thomas in the evenings, taking him for walks or teaching him to rope fence posts with a length of old hemp, giving Olivia quiet time to work. They fell into a new rhythm, more intimate than before. Benjamin began taking his meals with them rather than eating alone in the stable. After Thomas went to bed, he and Olivia would sit together, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes. She learned that he had grown up in Kansas, worked his first cattle drive at 14, spent 10 years drifting from ranch to ranch before arriving in Jackson. He had never married, never even come close, always moving on before he could put down roots. "What made you stop here?" Olivia asked one night. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the fire in the small stove. "Honestly, I saw you that first day before the shooting. You were at the general store with Thomas buying flour. He was asking for peppermint sticks, and you were trying to explain why you could not afford them. He was not whining or crying, just accepting it with this brave little face. And you looked so tired, so worn down, but you were still smiling for him. I thought, He paused, seeming embarrassed. "I thought, there is a woman who deserves better than what life has given her." Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. "You saw me before Richard was killed." "Yes. I was going to leave that same day, head further west. Then the shooting happened, and I heard Brennan's men talking about the widow, and I realized it was you. I could not just ride away after that. So you stayed for me." It was not a question. "I stayed for you," he confirmed, meeting her eyes. "And I will keep staying, for as long as you will have me." She wanted to kiss him. The urge was so strong it made her ache. But Richard had been dead less than 2 months, and people were already talking about the cowboy living above Olivia Carson's stable. If she gave them more ammunition, it could ruin her reputation entirely, make it impossible to build her sewing business. As if reading her thoughts, Benjamin said, "I know we have to be careful. I know people talk. But when this is all over, when Brennan is paid and you are clear of Richard's debts, I want to court you properly, if you would allow it." "I would allow it," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "I would welcome it." His smile was radiant, and he reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand. They sat like that until the fire burned low, not speaking, just holding on to each other. November arrived with the first real snow, light dustings that melted by midday, but promised harder weather to come. Olivia's sewing business was doing better than she had hoped, with women coming from as far as 15 miles away to commission dresses and alterations. Benjamin had taken on extra work at the ranch, including some dangerous jobs breaking wild horses that paid well, but left him bruised and exhausted. Thomas thrived under Benjamin's attention, growing more confident and cheerful than Olivia had ever seen him. He followed Benjamin everywhere when the cowboy was home, mimicking his walk, his speech patterns, even the way he tipped his hat to ladies on the street. It was clear the boy was forming a deep attachment, and while it warmed Olivia's heart, it also frightened her. What if something went wrong? What if Benjamin left, or got hurt, or Brennan made good on his threats? But Benjamin seemed just as attached to Thomas. He taught the boy to ride on an old mare borrowed from the ranch, walking beside them in circles around the yard while Thomas whooped with joy. He carved Thomas a wooden horse, painted and detailed with incredible care. He told stories at bedtime, wild tales of cattle drives and stampedes that left Thomas breathless with excitement. "You think Mr. Porter will stay forever?" Thomas asked Olivia one night as she tucked him in. "I do not know, sweetheart. We can hope." "I hope too. I hope so much that my stomach hurts." Olivia smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her heart aching. "Whatever happens, you know that Mr. Porter cares about you very much, right?" "He said I am like the son he never had," Thomas said sleepily. "I said he is like the papa I always wanted." Olivia had to leave the room quickly, overwhelmed by emotion. She found Benjamin downstairs, and when he looked up and saw her face, he stood immediately, concern creasing his brow. "What is wrong?" "Thomas loves you," she said, the words tumbling out. "He loves you so much, and I am terrified of what will happen if we cannot make this work. If something goes wrong." Benjamin crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. It was the first time he had held her, really held her, and Olivia melted into his embrace, breathing in the scent of him, leather and horses and wood smoke. "Nothing is going to go wrong," he said fiercely, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "I promise you, Olivia. I will keep you both safe. I will pay that bastard every cent he is owed, and then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and Thomas have everything you need." She pulled back just enough to look up at his face. "You do not have to promise me forever. I know you have always moved on, never stayed in one place. That was before I had a reason to stay, before I had a home." His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You and Thomas are my home now. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." She rose on her toes and kissed him, unable to hold back any longer. His lips were warm and gentle, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her want to cry. It was nothing like kissing Richard, who had always been rough and demanding. This was sweet and careful, Benjamin asking rather than taking, waiting for her to show him what she wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I." They stood like that, wrapped in each other, until they heard footsteps overhead and hastily separated. Thomas appeared on the stairs in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled. Benjamin scooped him up without hesitation, settling the boy against his shoulder. "Want to tell me about it?" As Benjamin carried Thomas back upstairs, murmuring comfort, Olivia pressed her fingers to her lips and let herself believe, just for a moment, that everything might actually be all right. By the third week of November, they had scraped together $240. It was not enough, but it was closer than Olivia had dared hope 2 months ago. She worked her fingers raw with sewing, and Benjamin took every extra job he could find. They were both exhausted, running themselves ragged, but determination kept them going. Then disaster struck. Benjamin was working with a particularly wild stallion at the Roberts Ranch when the horse reared unexpectedly and threw him. He landed badly, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The ranch hands carried him back to town in a wagon, his face gray with pain, his left arm hanging at an odd angle. The doctor confirmed that the shoulder was dislocated and Benjamin had cracked 2 ribs. He set the shoulder with Benjamin biting down on a leather strap to keep from screaming, then wrapped his ribs and prescribed rest. "No work for at least 3 weeks, the doctor said firmly. "If you do not let this heal properly, you could do permanent damage. 3 weeks. They had 1 week until Brennan's deadline, and now Benjamin could not work at all. Olivia tried not to let her panic show as she helped Benjamin back to their rooms. He was unsteady on his feet, dosed with laudanum for the pain, and she had to support most of his weight as they climbed the stairs. "I am sorry," he kept saying, his voice slurred. "I am so sorry, Olivia. I promised I would keep you safe. And now, hush," she said, guiding him to her bed since he could not manage the ladder down to the stable. "This is not your fault. Accidents happen. But the money, we will figure something out. Right now, you need to rest." Thomas watched from the corner, his eyes huge with fear. Once Benjamin was settled and sleeping fitfully, Olivia pulled her son close. "Is Mr. Porter going to die?" Thomas whispered. "No, sweetheart. He is hurt, but he will heal. He just needs time." "But what about the bad man who wants our money?" Olivia had tried to shield Thomas from the worst of it, but he was a perceptive child. He knew they were in trouble. "I will handle it," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "Everything will be fine." That night, after Thomas was asleep, Olivia sat at her table and looked at their money one more time. $240. She needed 60 more, and she had 5 days to get it. She thought about the jewelry Richard had given her in better days, before the gambling took over. Most of it was paste and worthless, but there was one piece, a gold locket that had belonged to his mother. Richard had pawned and retrieved it 6 times, but Olivia had managed to keep it hidden during the worst of his debts. It might be worth $20 or $30. The rest would have to come from her sewing. If she worked day and night, did not sleep, took every rush job no matter how unreasonable, maybe, just maybe, she could do it. For the next 4 days, Olivia barely slept. She sewed until her eyes burned and her fingers bled, taking on work she would normally refuse, charging premium prices for rush service. She pawned the locket and got $25 for it. She sold her mother's silver hairbrush for another $5. She even considered selling her wedding ring, but could not quite bring herself to do it, not because of any sentimental attachment to Richard, but because it felt like admitting defeat. Benjamin tried to help despite his injuries, taking care of Thomas, doing one-handed tasks around the house, even attempting to chop wood until Olivia found him and nearly had a fit. "You are going to rip your stitches," she scolded, taking the axe away from him. "I cannot just lie there while you work yourself to death," he protested, his face pale with pain and frustration. "You can and you will. You would do the same for me if our positions were reversed. That is different." "How? Because you are a man. I am perfectly capable of taking care of us." He looked at her with such frustration and admiration mixed together that she wanted to kiss him and throttle him at the same time. "I know you are capable," he said quietly. "You are the most capable person I have ever met, but that does not mean I like watching you suffer." "Then get better," Olivia said, her voice softening. "Heal up so you can help. That is what I need from you right now." On the morning of November 30th, Olivia counted out the money one final time. $297. She was $3 short, $3. After all that work, all that sacrifice, she was still short. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to take the money and throw it in Brennan's face and tell him to go to hell. But none of that would help, so she just sat at the table with her head in her hands and tried to figure out what to do. "Mama," Thomas's small voice broke through her despair. "Are you sad?" She looked up to find him standing beside her chair, holding his little wooden box where he kept his treasures. Rocks and feathers and the peppermint stick Benjamin had bought him last week. "I am just tired, sweetheart." "Is it because of the money?" He opened his box and pulled out 2 coins. "I have been saving. It is only $2, but you can have it." Olivia's heart shattered. "Oh, Thomas, no, that is your money. You have been saving for months. But you need it more than me. Mr. Porter said we have to help each other when times are hard. I want to help." She pulled him into her lap, hugging him tight, tears streaming down her face. "You are the best boy in the whole world, do you know that? So you will take it." She should say no. It was wrong to take a child's savings. But they were $1 short now instead of 3, and she was out of options. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will take it, and someday I will pay you back with interest." "What is interest?" "It means extra to say thank you." Thomas beamed, proud of himself, and Olivia held him close and wondered how she had gotten so lucky to have such a good son. She was still sitting there, trying to figure out where to find one more dollar, when Benjamin came downstairs moving stiffly but under his own power. "I heard Thomas," he said. "That was a brave thing he did. We are still $1 short." Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. "Then I guess it is a good thing I have been holding on to this. Benjamin, that is your last money, and I am giving it to you." "Take it, Olivia. Let us finish this." She took the coin with shaking hands, added it to the pile, and recounted. $300 exactly. "We did it," she said, almost unable to believe it. "We actually did it." Benjamin smiled, though the expression was strained with pain from his injuries. "You did it. I just helped." "We did it together," Olivia corrected. She stood and kissed him, careful not to jar his shoulder. "Thank you for everything. For staying when you had every reason to leave, for caring about us, for being the man you are." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," he said simply. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Olivia walked into the Brass Bell Saloon with Benjamin at her side and $300 in her reticule. The place fell silent when they entered, every eye turning toward them. Jack Brennan sat at his usual table in the back, a glass of whiskey in front of him and a cigar between his fingers. "Mrs. Carson," he said. his tone mocking. "I was beginning to think you were going to make me come collect." "I have your money," Olivia said, crossing to his table with her head high. She pulled out the cloth bag where she had counted out the exact amount and set it on the table. $300. Count it if you like." Brennan's eyes narrowed. He dumped the money out and counted it slowly, making a show of checking each bill and coin. Finally, he sat back and nodded. "Looks like it is all here. I admit, I am surprised. I did not think a seamstress and a broken-down ranch hand could scrape together this much." "We are full of surprises," Benjamin said evenly. "I want a receipt," Olivia said. "In writing, signed by you, stating that Richard Carson's debt is paid in full." Brennan's jaw tightened, but he pulled out a piece of paper and scrawled out the receipt. His handwriting was barely legible, but it was legal enough. He signed with a flourish and shoved it across the table. "There, we are square. Now get out of my saloon." Olivia took the receipt and folded it carefully into her reticule. "One more thing. If you ever threaten me or my son again, that letter with the territorial marshal goes public. I know you have influence in Jackson, but it does not extend to Cheyenne. Are we clear?" Brennan's face darkened to an ugly red, but he nodded curtly. "Crystal." They left the saloon together, and it was not until they were back in their rooms that Olivia allowed herself to collapse into a chair, shaking with relief. "It is over," she said. "It is really over." Benjamin knelt awkwardly beside her chair, his good arm around her shoulders. "You were magnificent. Did you see his face when you demanded the receipt? I was terrified. You did not show it. You were strong and fierce, and I have never been prouder of anyone in my life." She turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to say. His face was still pale from pain, his shoulder bound tight, but his eyes were warm and full of something that made her breath catch. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could think better of them. "I know it is too soon, and I know I should wait longer after Richard, but I cannot help it. I love you, Benjamin Porter." His face transformed, joy breaking across it like dawn. "I love you too. I have loved you since the day I saw you choosing between flour and peppermint sticks, trying to make $1 stretch further than it could possibly go. I loved your strength and your courage, and I love you more every day." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Olivia felt something settle in her chest, some piece that had been missing her whole life finally clicking into place. Thomas's voice broke them apart. "Are you going to get married now?" They looked up to find him standing on the stairs, grinning from ear to ear. "That is the plan," Benjamin said, ruffling the boy's hair as he came closer. "If your mama will have me, that is." "I will have you," Olivia said softly, "if you are serious about staying." "I am serious about everything when it comes to you and Thomas. I want to marry you, adopt Thomas if you will allow it, give him my name. I want us to be a real family." "We are already a real family," Olivia said, "but I would like to make it official. Yes, I will marry you." Thomas whooped and launched himself at Benjamin, who caught him with his good arm and swung him around despite the obvious pain it caused. Olivia watched them together, her heart so full it hurt, and thought about how her life had changed in just 3 months. She had gone from desperate widow to a woman with a future, all because a cowboy with no obligation had chosen to stay. They were married in December, a quiet ceremony at the small church in Jackson with only a handful of witnesses. Olivia wore a dress she had made herself, simple but elegant in deep blue wool. Benjamin wore his best clothes, his arm still in a sling but healing well. Thomas stood between them, holding their hands, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the boy cheered loud enough to make the congregation laugh. Benjamin kissed his new bride tenderly, then bent and kissed Thomas's forehead. "Now we are official," he said. They moved into a small house on the edge of town that Benjamin bought with his savings and a loan from the bank. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a lean-to for Benjamin's horse, but it was theirs. Olivia set up her sewing business in the front room, and Benjamin found steady work at the Roberts ranch. Thomas started school and thrived, making friends and learning to read with the fierce determination he had inherited from his mother. The winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but they weathered it together. Benjamin's shoulder healed slowly but surely, and by spring he was back to full strength. He taught Thomas to fish in the creek that ran behind their house, and on warm evenings, the 3 of them would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Olivia's sewing business grew as word spread about the quality of her work. She made dresses for weddings and christenings, altered men's suits, even did some upholstery work for the furniture in the new hotel. The money was good, and combined with Benjamin's wages, they were able to save a little each month. Jack Brennan kept his distance, though Olivia sometimes saw him watching them with cold eyes when they passed on the street. She knew he had not forgotten or forgiven, but with the letter safely filed in Cheyenne and Benjamin's protective presence, she felt secure enough. In the spring of 1879, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Benjamin one evening after Thomas was in bed, nervous about his reaction. They had only been married a few months and money was still tight, but Benjamin's face lit up like she had given him the stars. A baby. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy, Olivia, I am." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "I am the happiest man alive. A baby, our baby. You do not think it is too soon. I think it is perfect. Thomas will be a wonderful big brother and you will be an amazing mother. Again. Still." He set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "I love you so much. Thank you for giving me this family, this life. I never thought I would have any of it." Olivia kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "Thank you for staying, for being the man who stayed." Their daughter was born in November, a squalling, red-faced bundle they named Grace. Thomas was enchanted with his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to midnight feedings. Benjamin was a devoted father, walking the floor with Grace when she cried, singing her nonsense songs in his deep voice, looking at her with such wonder that it made Olivia want to cry. "I cannot believe she is ours," he said one night, holding Grace while she slept against his shoulder. "I keep thinking I will wake up and this will all have been a dream." "It is real," Olivia assured him. "We are real. This family is real." As the years passed, their family grew and flourished. Benjamin was promoted to foreman at the Roberts Ranch, a position that came with better pay and a small house on the property. They sold the house in town and moved to the ranch, where Thomas had room to run and play, where Grace could grow up with fresh air and open spaces. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like Benjamin, with his mother's quick mind and kind heart. He learned ranching from his adopted father, absorbing everything Benjamin could teach him about horses and cattle, about hard work and integrity. He never asked about Richard Carson, seemed to have no memory of the man who had contributed nothing but chaos to his early years. Benjamin was his father in every way that mattered. Grace was a spirited child, fearless and curious, with Olivia's blonde hair and Benjamin's green eyes. She followed her brother and father everywhere, learning to ride almost before she could walk, bringing home injured animals for her mother to heal, asking 1,000 questions a day that Benjamin answered with inexhaustible patience. In 1882, Olivia gave birth to twin boys, William and Henry, who kept the household in cheerful chaos with their endless energy and constant mischief. Benjamin built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Olivia sewed clothes and curtains and quilts, her hands always busy but her heart always full. They prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money, though they did well enough financially. The ranch thrived under Benjamin's management, and Olivia's sewing brought in steady income. But their real wealth was in each other, in the love that filled their home, in the laughter and arguments and ordinary moments that made up a life. Thomas grew up and married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They built a house nearby and started their own family, giving Olivia and Benjamin their first grandchildren. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind, who eventually went east to study teaching and returned to open Jackson's first proper school. William and Henry took over running the ranch as Benjamin aged, working as a team the way they had done everything since birth. Through it all, Olivia and Benjamin remained deeply in love. They had their disagreements, their hard times, their moments of doubt and fear. But they faced everything together, united by a bond that had been forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. On their 20th anniversary, Benjamin took Olivia back to Jackson, to the room above the general store where he had first knocked on her door and offered to help. "You remember?" he asked, standing in the empty space that now stored grain and supplies. "Of course I remember. I thought you were insane, a stranger offering to protect us for nothing but a place to sleep. I was insane, crazy about you from the first moment I saw you." He pulled her close, his arms strong around her waist. "I have never regretted it, not for a single second. Every choice I made that led me to you was the right one. Even getting thrown by that horse and breaking your ribs, even that. Because it showed me that we could survive anything together, that you were strong enough to carry us when I could not." Olivia reached up and touched his face, now lined with the years but still handsome to her eyes. His hair was shot with silver, his hands roughened by decades of hard work, but his eyes still looked at her with the same love that had been there from the beginning. "You stayed," she said softly. "You had no obligation, no reason, but you stayed anyway. Best decision I ever made." "Thomas told me something a few years ago," Olivia said. "He said he did not remember much about those early days, about Richard or being poor or Brennan's threats, but he said he remembers you showing up and everything getting better. He said you saved us." "Thomas saved himself with his $2, Benjamin said, smiling at the memory. "That boy has always had more courage than 10 grown men. He learned it from you. They all did. Grace's fearlessness, the twins' loyalty to each other, Thomas's integrity. They learned it by watching you." Benjamin shook his head. "They learned it from both of us. You taught them kindness and strength, how to survive hardship without losing themselves. We did it together." "Together," Olivia agreed. "Always together." They left the old storage room hand in hand and walked through Jackson, pointing out the changes that 20 years had brought. The town had grown, new buildings springing up, the rough edges slowly being civilized. The Brass Bell Saloon was now a respectable hotel. Jack Brennan had died of a heart attack 5 years ago, unmourned by most of the town. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Benjamin pulled Olivia close and kissed her the way he had that first night after they paid Brennan, when she had told him she loved him, and he had kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Here is to 20 more years," he said. "At least 20 more," Olivia corrected. "I plan on growing very old with you, Benjamin Porter. I will hold you to that, Mrs. Porter." They rode home together through the gathering dusk, past fields where their sons worked the cattle, past the small house where their eldest son lived with his growing family, past the schoolhouse where their daughter taught the next generation. Their own home glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney, and as they drew near, Grace came out onto the porch to wave at them. This was what a life looked like, Olivia thought. Not perfect, not without struggle or sorrow, but full of love and purpose. And it had all started because one cowboy had decided to stay when he could have left, to help when he had no obligation, to love when he had no guarantee it would be returned. Thomas never knew, not really, what a difference that choice had made. He had been too young to understand the danger they were in, the desperation that had driven his mother to accept help from a stranger. He grew up thinking it was normal to have a father who loved him, a safe home, enough to eat. He did not know that it could have been so different, that he might have grown up watching his mother struggle alone, might have lost everything to a cruel man's greed. But Olivia knew. She knew every single day when she woke up beside Benjamin, when she watched him with their children, when she felt his hand in hers. She knew what it meant to be chosen, to be worth staying for, to be loved by a good man who could have walked away but did not. And that made all the difference. Years later, when Olivia was old and gray and sitting on her porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard, Thomas came to visit. He was a man of 40 now, with children of his own, but something in his expression reminded her of the frightened 4-year-old he had been. "Mama," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "I was going through some old papers and I found something, a receipt for $300 paid to Jack Brennan." Olivia's heart skipped. She had kept that receipt all these years, a reminder of what they had overcome. "I did not know things were that bad," Thomas continued. $300 back then, that was a fortune. How did you manage it?" Olivia looked out at Benjamin, who was teaching the grandchildren to rope fence posts the way he had once taught Thomas. He moved slower now, his joints stiff with age, but his laugh was the same, warm and full of joy. "We worked," she said simply. "Your father and I, we worked as hard as we could and we made it happen." "My father," Thomas repeated, and there was no question about who he meant. Not Richard Carson, who had died owing money and leaving chaos in his wake, but Benjamin Porter, who had chosen to be a father when he did not have to be. "He saved us, did he not?" "Yes," Olivia said. "He did. But not just with money, Thomas. He saved us by staying, by choosing us every single day." That was the real gift. Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching Benjamin with the children. "I wish I could remember more about those early days, about how scared you must have been, how hard it was. Sometimes I feel like I did not appreciate it enough. You were a child. You were not supposed to carry that weight." Olivia reached over and took her son's hand. "But you gave us your $2, do you remember that? Your whole savings because you wanted to help." "I remember. You paid me back with interest. And you used it to buy your first horse, which you named Courage." Thomas smiled. "I thought I was so brave, contributing my $2. I did not realize it was just a drop in the ocean of what you needed." "It was everything," Olivia corrected, "because it meant we were a family all pulling together. You, me, Benjamin. We survived because we had each other." Benjamin looked up then, as if sensing them talking about him, and waved. Thomas waved back, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you, Mama," he said. "And I love Dad. I hope you know how grateful I am for everything you did, everything you sacrificed." "I know, sweetheart. And we love you too. You and your sisters and brothers, you are our greatest joy." As Thomas left to rejoin his own family, Olivia sat in the fading light and counted her blessings. 6 children, 17 grandchildren so far, a husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon. A life full of hard work and simple pleasures, of love given and received, all because a cowboy with no obligation had chosen to stay. Benjamin came up onto the porch eventually, lowering himself into the chair beside her with a groan. "Getting too old for all this excitement," he complained, but he was smiling. "You will never be too old to teach children about horses," Olivia said. "It is in your blood." "Maybe. But I think I will leave it to the younger generation soon. Let Thomas and the boys handle the ranch full time. You have earned your rest." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers with the ease of 50 years of practice. They had been married for 43 years, together for 44, and Olivia still felt that flutter in her chest when he touched her. "No regrets?" he asked, a question he posed every year on their anniversary. "Not a single one," she answered, as she always did. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner, could have had even more years with you. We have had plenty of years, and God willing, we will have more." They sat together as the stars came out, the mountains dark shapes against the deepening sky, the house warm and bright behind them. Somewhere inside, their youngest grandchild was learning to walk, taking wobbly steps between her mother's hands. In town, their daughter was planning lessons for the new school term. At the neighboring ranch, their eldest son was tucking his own children into bed. The family they had built together, born from crisis and choice, from courage and love. "I am glad you stayed," Olivia said softly. Benjamin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture as tender as it had been that first night when she had told him she loved him. "I am glad I stayed too," he said. "Best decision I ever made." And as they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the life they had created, Olivia knew it was true. Sometimes the most important moments in life came from the simplest choices, a decision to help when you did not have to stay when you could leave, to love when you had every reason to guard your heart. Benjamin Porter had made that choice, and it had changed everything. For Thomas, who grew up with a father who loved him. For Grace and William and Henry, who were born into a family built on that foundation. For Olivia, who learned that love could be kind and steady, not just passionate and destructive. And for Benjamin himself, who found the home he had been searching for his whole life. The child never knew what a difference it made, but the woman knew. She knew every day, in every moment, in every breath. She knew, and she was grateful. And that was enough. That was everything. As the years continued to pass, Olivia and Benjamin settled into a comfortable rhythm of retirement. They sold their interest in the ranch to their sons, keeping only the house and a small plot of land around it. Benjamin spent his days tending a vegetable garden that became the pride of the county, growing tomatoes the size of a man's fist and corn that reached higher than his head. Olivia continued her sewing on a smaller scale, making clothes for the grandchildren and teaching Grace's daughter the art of the perfect stitch. They traveled occasionally, taking the train to Denver to visit Grace when she attended a teaching conference, going to Cheyenne to see the capital and remember the letter that had saved their lives. But mostly they stayed home, content with their small corner of Wyoming and the family that surrounded them. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together 3 generations of Porters. The house overflowed with people, laughter bouncing off the walls, children running underfoot while adults caught up on news and gossip. Someone had hired a fiddle player, and Benjamin pulled Olivia onto the makeshift dance floor despite her protests that they were too old for such foolishness. "Never too old to dance with my wife," he said, sweeping her into a waltz that had everyone clapping along. As they turned together, Olivia looked around at all the faces watching them. Thomas, now 54 and distinguished with silver at his temples, his arm around his wife of 30 years. Grace, 48 and formidable, teaching at the university in Laramie now but home for the celebration. William and Henry, 46, and still finishing each other's sentences, running the ranch with the same partnership they had shown since birth. And all the grandchildren, some with children of their own now, making Olivia and Benjamin great-grandparents 4 times over. "Look what we made," Benjamin whispered in her ear as they danced. "Look at this beautiful family." "We did good," Olivia agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "We did better than good. We did magnificent." When the party finally wound down and the last guests left, Olivia and Benjamin sat on their porch in the gathering darkness, tired but happy. The house was clean, their children having insisted on tidying everything before they left, and the quiet was welcome after so much noise. 50 years, Olivia said, marveling at the number. "How did we get here so fast, one day at a time, one choice at a time?" Benjamin pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Remember that first week? When you said I could stay for 1 week and we would see how it went? I remember. I was terrified you would steal what little we had and disappear. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even exhausted and scared and holding on by a thread. You should have run while you had the chance. And miss all this, not for anything in the world." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Somewhere in the darkness, one of their barn cats was hunting. The mountains were shadows against the star-filled sky. "Benjamin," Olivia said eventually, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped that day? If you had just kept riding west like you planned?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think about all the things I would have missed, meeting you, raising Thomas, having our children, all the years we have had together." He turned to look at her, his face barely visible in the starlight. "I think about what a hollow, lonely life I would have had, drifting from place to place with no one to care about and no one to care about me. And I thank God every day that I saw you in that general store, that something made me stay long enough to help." "It was not just God," Olivia said. "It was you, your choice, your goodness. Maybe it was both. Maybe God puts us in places where we can make the right choice, and then it is up to us to actually make it. You made the right choice. So did you. You could have sent me away that first night. You had no reason to trust a stranger. I trusted my gut, and my gut said you were a good man." Benjamin laughed softly. "Your gut was smarter than most people's brains." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold, then went inside to the bedroom they had shared for 50 years. They moved slowly now, helping each other undress, Benjamin's fingers fumbling with the small buttons on Olivia's dress. Olivia carefully removing the bandage on Benjamin's knee, where arthritis had flared up. In bed, they lay facing each other, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. Benjamin's arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and Olivia sighed contentedly. "I love you," she said, as she had said every night for 50 years. "I love you too," he answered, as he had answered every night for 50 years. "Sleep well, Olivia. Sleep well, Benjamin." They slept. When Olivia woke in the morning, she knew immediately that something was wrong. Benjamin's arm was still around her waist, but it was too still, too heavy. His breathing, which usually rumbled softly beside her ear, was silent. "Benjamin," she said, her voice sharp with sudden fear. "Benjamin, wake up." But he did not wake up. He had died in his sleep, peacefully and without pain, holding the woman he loved. Olivia did not scream or cry, not at first. She lay there with his arm around her, memorizing the feel of him one last time, thanking him for the life they had built together. Then, gently, she extracted herself from his embrace and went to wake their sons. The funeral was held on a bright October day, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. What felt like half the county turned out to pay their respects to Benjamin Porter. the foreman who had run the Roberts Ranch with fairness and integrity for 40 years, the man who had helped build Jackson from a rough frontier town into a thriving community, the father and grandfather and great-grandfather who had loved his family with his whole heart. Thomas delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about the man who had chosen to be his father, who had taught him everything worth knowing about being a man. Grace read from Scripture, her normally strong voice wavering. William and Henry stood by the grave with their arms around each other, tears streaming down their identical faces, and Olivia sat in the front row, dry-eyed and dignified, her hands folded in her lap. People whispered that she was in shock, that the grief had not hit her yet. But the truth was simpler. Olivia was not in shock. She was grateful for 50 years when she might have had none, grateful for a love that had sustained her through every hardship, grateful for the family Benjamin had given her, the life he had helped her build. Grateful that he had died peacefully without suffering, still holding her close. She would grieve, of course. The grief was already there, a heavy weight in her chest. But it was grief mixed with gratitude, sorrow leavened with joy for all they had shared. After the funeral, after the mourners had left and the family had gathered at her house, Thomas pulled Olivia aside. "How are you really?" he asked, searching her face. "I am sad," she said honestly, "but I am also at peace. Your father and I had a wonderful life together. Not everyone gets that. He loved you so much, and I loved him. That love does not end just because he is gone. It will be with me for the rest of my life." Thomas hugged her, and Olivia let herself lean on her son, this boy who had become a man, who had learned strength and kindness from the cowboy who had chosen to stay. Olivia lived another 5 years after Benjamin's death. Years she spent surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the day he had knocked on her door and offered to help, about how they had scraped together $300 to pay a debt, about the house they had built and the life they had made. She showed Thomas the receipt from Jack Brennan, carefully preserved all these years, and explained what it had meant to pay that debt, to be free of Richard Carson's mistakes. She showed Grace the first dress she had ever made for money, the one that had started her sewing business. She showed William and Henry the wooden horse Benjamin had carved for Thomas, now worn smooth by 3 generations of children playing with it, and she told them, over and over, about the importance of choosing to stay, of showing up for the people you love, even when it is hard, of building a life together, one day at a time. When Olivia died in her sleep at the age of 83, she was buried beside Benjamin under the aspens they had both loved. Her children gathered around the grave, their children beside them, their children's children squirming in their best clothes. Thomas, now 71, and looking so much like Benjamin it made people do a double take, stood at the graveside and spoke about his mother. About her strength and courage, her kindness and grace, about how she had raised him and his siblings to be good people, to work hard, to love deeply. But most of all, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, she taught us about the power of choice, about how one person, making one good decision, can change everything. My father chose to help a widow and her child when he had no reason to. My mother chose to let him. Together, they chose to build a life, to build a family, to build something beautiful out of circumstances that could have destroyed them. He looked around at all the faces, the descendants of Olivia Carson and Benjamin Porter, dozens of people who existed because of that choice made on a September day in 1878. We are all here because of that choice, Thomas continued. Every one of us. We are the legacy of their love, the proof that goodness and courage and commitment matter. And I hope we honor them by making the same kinds of choices in our own lives, by staying when it would be easier to leave, by helping when we do not have to, by loving when love is hard. After the funeral, the family gathered at the old house, which William and Henry had maintained exactly as their parents had left it. They walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects, telling stories, laughing and crying together. Sarah, Thomas's wife, found a journal in Olivia's sewing basket, a small leather-bound book filled with her neat handwriting. She brought it to Thomas, who opened it carefully and began to read. It was dated from that first year, 1878, entries written late at night after the work was done and Thomas was asleep. Olivia had documented everything: her fear and desperation after Richard's death, the strange cowboy who had offered to help, the struggle to pay Brennan's debt, the growing love between her and Benjamin. One entry, written the night before they paid Brennan, caught Thomas's attention. "Tomorrow we pay the debt and this nightmare will be over. I should feel only relief, but instead I feel something else. Gratitude, wonder. Benjamin could have left at any point. He owed us nothing. But he stayed, and in staying he saved us. Not just from Brennan, but from a life of fear and struggle. He gave Thomas a father, gave me a partner, gave us both a future we could not have imagined. I do not know what I did to deserve this second chance, this good man who looks at me like I am something precious. But I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. I will love him with everything I have, raise our family together, build a life that honors the choice he made to stay." Thomas closed the journal, his eyes wet. He looked around at his siblings, his children, his grandchildren. "She was right," he said. "Dad saved us by staying, and she saved him right back by loving him. They saved each other. And they gave us everything," Grace added softly. The family stayed at the house until dark, sharing memories and making new ones, binding themselves together the way Olivia and Benjamin had taught them. Before they left, Thomas walked through the house one last time, touching the furniture his father had built, the curtains his mother had sewn, the photographs that lined the walls in the bedroom. He paused by the dresser where a single photograph sat in a place of honor. It showed Olivia and Benjamin on their 50th anniversary, dancing together while their family looked on. The love in their faces was so clear, so radiant, that it seemed to shine out of the photograph. Thomas picked it up, studying their faces. His mother, beautiful even at 73, her eyes sparkling with joy. His father, still handsome despite the years, looking at Olivia like she was the only person in the world. "Thank you," Thomas whispered to the photograph. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for showing us what love looks like. Thank you for everything." He set the photograph back in its place and left the room, closing the door gently behind him. The house stood empty after that, preserved by the family as a kind of memorial to Olivia and Benjamin Porter. Visitors could tour it, see how people lived in the late 1800s, hear the story of the widow and the cowboy who built a life together against all odds. The story became a legend in Jackson, passed down through generations. Children learned about it in school, about Olivia's courage and Benjamin's goodness, about how one choice to stay had created a legacy that lasted over a century. But the real legacy was not in the stories or the house, or even the dozens of descendants who carried the Porter name. The real legacy was in the choices those descendants made, the way they showed up for each other in times of crisis, the way they chose to stay when leaving would have been easier, the way they loved deeply and committed fully, building lives and families that honored the example set by their great-great-grandparents. Thomas's grandson, another Benjamin Porter, became a doctor who chose to work in rural communities where medical care was scarce, staying when other doctors left for better pay in the cities. Grace's great-granddaughter became a teacher in a struggling school district, staying year after year to help children who had no one else. William's great-great-grandson joined the military and came home with wounds that would have given him an honorable discharge. But he stayed and served another 20 years because his unit needed him. On and on it went, ripples spreading out from that first choice made on a dusty street in Jackson, Wyoming in 1878. One cowboy deciding to help, one widow deciding to trust, one family deciding to stay together no matter what. And a child who never fully knew what a difference it made, but who carried that legacy in his bones and passed it down to his own children, who passed it to theirs, who passed it to theirs. The love story of Olivia Carson and Benjamin Porter was not just their story. It was the story of everyone who came after them, everyone who chose to stay, to help, to love. It was a story that proved that one good choice, made with courage and commitment, could echo through time and change the world in ways both large and small. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Olivia and Benjamin were together still, dancing under the stars, holding each other close, grateful for every day they had been given and every choice that had brought them together. The end of their story, but also the beginning of so many others. The legacy of the cowboy who stayed.